But Dr. Silhan is really, I saw her speak, I guess, what, 6-7 months ago. And she came to our PF Warriors meeting and did a presentation on oxygen. And I can tell you it was one of the most interactive meetings we've ever had, because we all have questions on oxygen. It's kind of that mystery area for most of us. And her background is just not just for oxygen, but her background in the pulmonary area and ILD, interstitial lung disease area, is just phenomenal. She's the assistant professor of internal medicine at UT Southwestern Medical Center here in Dallas. She received her medical degree from UT Southwestern and then left, went up to Baltimore. She was involved there in specialty training at the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore. And then she was on the faculty at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where she worked as a specialist in both interstitial lung disease and lung transplantation. So very unique, different background. She was involved in those, I'm going to call her one of the catalysts in Johns Hopkins becoming a center of excellence, as recognized by the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. Currently, she's involved as a clinical doctor and assistant professor here in Dallas. She's very, I'm going to use this word because I use it very carefully. She is truly patient-centric. She really cares about us. And you can see it in her practice. In the patients that I know that attend her and go to her, she is without a doubt one of the good guys, and she's just super. I'm so happy that she's here today. Dr. Silhan, it is yours.
All right, thank you so much, Bill, for the really nice introduction. Hello, everyone. This is should be somewhat informal, so if you can just address me as Leann, actually, even though Bill keeps calling me Dr. Silhan. What I have put together today is a discussion about supplemental oxygen. It's an abbreviated version of some talks I've given before, so it is certainly not comprehensive, because I could talk for several hours about supplemental oxygen to cover every detail, but we can certainly, I'm sure there's questions that you have now, and probably may even have more after I give the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Bill, can you direct me again how to pull up my slides so everyone can see them?
Yes, bottom of your screen, you'll see a green button that says share.
Great.
And then you can expand that to the full window.
All right, can everyone see my slides? Okay, great. So with that, I'll get started. So I have no relevant financial disclosures for this presentation. And my slides will not advance for some reason. Okay.
You're probably clicking on the screen and not the application itself, Dr. Silhan. And I have to call you Dr. Silhan as my mark of respect. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm having some technical difficulties here, even though that worked fine a few minutes ago. Does everyone see my disclosure slide? Is that what's up currently?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Silhan, you're probably clicking on the screen you're seeing and not the application itself. If you go to your menu at the bottom of your screen and select your PowerPoint or whatever you're using for your slides, that will then come up to the screen so you can actually click on it.
Okay. Yeah, there's no menu, and my mouse and my keyboard does not seem to be doing anything.
You might try hitting your escape key.
I've tried that. Okay, now there's a menu at the top, but for some reason my mouse does not seem to be activating it.
Well, having gone through this before, and we can see you talk, but that screen's going to take over the screen. let me see if I can do something here. I'm going to try to take you out of.
I can, let me grab my laptop as well, because I can sign into that and maybe do it from there. I came with a backup computer just in case something like this happened.
All right. Well, you know, the saying I use many, many times is everything will work out in the end.
Right.
If you haven't worked out, it's just not the end. So we'll do this. If we have to do this, we'll just do a talk basically instead of a presentation, which is fine because we have here, 30 some patients and caregivers that most are pretty savvy on oxygen and have some questions that need to be answered. And that could be just as the best part of the whole meeting, frankly. Love to see your presentation because I know you've done some work on it, but perhaps you can talk to that.
Okay, sure.
Can you possibly close that application so we can see you?
Everything is frozen on the computer. I think it's just maybe a computer glitch because I can't close anything out on it.
Right.
Like none of the buttons or anything are working. So let me try, let me just try getting into the meeting on my laptop.
Okay, Rick says that he can see you. He's not seeing the presentation. I'm seeing the presentation.
Okay.
All right.
Bill, if you have her slides, you can prompt the slides so she can see her slides on her other laptop.
Steve, I wish I had given the forethought to do that, and I didn't. I don't actually have a copy. She's got the copy.
Okay. Let me just forward them to you. Sorry, everyone, if you can bear with me just for a minute.
Hey, Bill,
Yeah, window's open for questions.
Bill, on my screen on the top, I've got you are viewing Leann's screen, view options, and there's an option to request remote control. I wonder if that would be helpful at all.
What you're saying is, can I do that? I'm not sure. I'm gonna give it a try. This is, and I'll apologize once because this is all kind of new stuff for all of us. To my knowledge, no one's ever tried to do something like this, and the only way to try it is to do it. So let me see what I can do here. I'm going to go into the slides. I'm going to withdraw co-host permission and then set it back up again, Dr. Silhan. Let's see what happens here. Can anybody tell me that it's unmuted? Are you seeing Dr. Silhan now, or are you still seeing the slide?
I'm still seeing the slides, Bill. I'm still seeing Leann. There's a small window for her, and the chat is open.
Bill, this is Dick. I find a little green thing up, a green note at the top of my screen that says you're viewing Leann Silhan's screen, and then right next to it was view options. And I went to that and went down the list to side-by-side mode. And now I'm watching both the slides and Leann.
So I'm rejoining on my laptop now. Can you guys see me on the...
Yeah, I don't see you. Are you coming in under Leann Silhan or a different name, Doctor?
I think it's Leann.
All right, let me see if I can find you here.
This is Jim. I'm seeing her on the small thumbnails. She's at the bottom of the list there.
I think I'm on it twice now.
All right, let me see if we can do that, and I'll make you the co-host again. And here we go. I can see you. Okay, I'm going to spotlight your video. Everyone should be seeing Dr. Silhan.
Yeah, we see you on your laptop now, Leann.
Okay, and it says I can't share my slides from this computer because I'm sharing them from another, so I'm going to shut down my desktop.
This is in a way, I know it's kind of crazy saying this, but this is kind of it's exciting and interesting in a way to see how this can actually work or not work. If we can't get it going, Dr. Silhan, what I'd like to do is simply have you talk to the issues of oxygen, because there's so many complex things that we all face with oxygen. I don't think any of us really have our heads wrapped around.
Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you, and I can see you perfectly.
Bill, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great.
Everyone else is muted.
We can hear you.
Okay, and you can see my slides?
No.
No, okay.
Yes. I'm still seeing your other screen.
The other
I can
screen,
see.
Dr.
I
Silhan, we're
can
not
hear
seeing the
you,
one
and
you're
I see
logged
the
in with.
disclosure screen.
I can see both.
There we go.
There.
Now
You
you're
transferred over to your laptop.
excellent. Perfect.
Got it now.
You're full screen now.
And can anyone see my slides?
No.
Not.
Okay.
Stop sharing on the other machine.
There you go.
There you go. Now you should be able to advance your slides. They just won't be full screen.
Okay. So the title slide, Supplemental Oxygen, is up?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, we'll continue on then. So I have no disclosures. The objectives that I want to talk about today is what is hypoxia and what is supplemental oxygen? And then secondly, which is probably where a lot of the information for you all would be helpful, is what different options are there available for oxygen. So hypoxia, or also termed hypoxemia, means a low oxygen level in the blood, and we can detect that by doing either a pulse oximetry, either on the finger or sometimes on the ear or head, and we can also detect it by doing an arterial blood gas, where a small needle is passed into the artery, typically in the wrist, called the radial artery. And what hypoxia means, or what it is essentially, is that the lungs are not able to bring in enough oxygen into the bloodstream from the air that is inhaled, so also termed inefficient oxygen uptake. And this can be caused by numerous different issues in the lungs, including simple things such as pneumonia or bad viral pneumonitis, but also from chronic lung diseases such as pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema. So there are 300 million air sacs in the lung, in a normal lung, and these little air sacs, also termed alveoli, pictured here, each one is coupled by a very small capillary or blood vessel, and that blood vessel is where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide happens. So as you breathe in, oxygen goes across that blood vessel and attaches to the red blood cells, and carbon dioxide comes out into the air sac, and you exhale that through the mouth. When the air sac is damaged by pulmonary fibrosis or other types of interstitial lung diseases, what happens is there's a thickening around the air sac wall, either from collagen, which is scar, or from inflammatory cells, as in inflammatory interstitial lung disease, and it creates a barrier and difficulty for oxygen to transverse from the air sac into the blood vessel. This tends to cause hypoxia, or low oxygen levels, initially only with exertion, as the reason that occurs, and that people usually have normal oxygen levels initially at rest, but they have low oxygen levels with exertion, is that when you exert yourself, your heart pumps faster and your blood flow goes through the lungs much quicker. And as the blood goes across that capillary, there's less time for the oxygen to diffuse across. And at rest, the slower flow of blood allows that oxygen more time to get across that barrier. With the short-term effects of low oxygen levels may include lightheadedness, of course, shortness of breath, fatigue, headaches, and if it's severe enough, some people may even pass out if the brain is not getting enough oxygen. The long-term effects of having low oxygen levels include polycythemia, which is an elevated red blood cell count, and that's due to a reaction in the kidneys to low oxygen levels. The kidneys are trying to compensate and put out a hormone called epopoietin, which increases the bone marrow's production of red blood cells. And polycythemia can create problems in and of itself. Pulmonary hypertension can also develop, which is high blood pressure within the lungs, and that's a physiologic response to low oxygen levels. That can lead to right heart disease or right heart failure, which is where the right heart is not able to pump against high pressures in the lungs. And the other thing that certainly many patients tell me is that they have a impaired memory or short-term memory loss, and sometimes impaired judgment. So what is supplemental oxygen? I love this picture because in football, when you watch the NFL, they're always going to the sideline and giving themselves extra oxygen. But it's basically you're just concentrating oxygen that's already in the air to increase your blood oxygen levels. And in patients that have pulmonary fibrosis, it's basically just extra oxygen to overcome that barrier in the air sac where the oxygen is slower at diffusing across that air sac into the capillary. So why can this be beneficial? So the short-term effects are increased exercise capacity, improved stamina, improved cognitive function. So people that have had some chronic hypoxia and started to develop short-term memory loss will often notice that their cognitive and memory problems improve pretty quickly. And then long-term, supplemental oxygen has been shown in people with hypoxia from emphysema and COPD to increase lifespan. This graph here to the right, this is from the 1980s, some really kind of old but very changing data that was done by Tom Petty and his group, where they took people that had a severe lung disease, and at that time they didn't really understand pulmonary fibrosis, and most of the severe lung disease was all thought to be emphysema and COPD, but they took people that had chronic hypoxia. And for 1 month, they did an exercise regimen to see if they could improve their exercise capacity or distance to walk. And they were able to improve the distance over time. However, they started on the second month with doing the exercise program, but added oxygen. And they had a logarithmic improvement in exercise capacity with oxygen supplementation. So now we'll get to the kind of bread and butter of the talk, which is what options do we have for supplemental oxygen? So I break it down into really 4 different categories, although some of them have some similarities. And what we're going to go through is each one of these and what their capabilities are and what the limitations are. So compressed gas, which is the tanks, that's one of the more common methods to deliver supplemental oxygen. Then we have stationary oxygen concentrators, which are in the home and plug into an electric outlet. Liquid oxygen. For liquid oxygen, there's both home liquid oxygen, which are very large tanks containing the liquid oxygen, which they have to refill. And then there's the portable version that can often be filled from the home tanks. And then there's the portable oxygen concentrators that come with a battery. So to start with, one of the more common ones that you've probably all seen, which is the compressed gas. These are the tanks of oxygen. They have both portable and stationary. And when I say stationary, I mean it's because they have some very, very large tanks. The M tanks are quite large and are often used in hospitals and operating rooms to give pure oxygen. These are compressed gas contained in a cylinder. They are under a high pressure, so 2,000 pounds per square inch. And the sizes vary by a lot, as you can see here in this picture. The E-cylinder, which is the more common one, which we have in clinics to give people supplemental oxygen, it's about hip high or waist high, and they are about 10 pounds empty and about 12 pounds full, and they hold 680 liters approximately of oxygen. These can have a conserving device added to them, which means that you can put a conserving device to give pulse flow, or you can use these with continuous flow. And the flow rates vary a lot depending on what regulator you have on them. And the regulator is the device that gets screwed onto the top of the tank, and they can go up to 25 liters per minute of flow. But also that flow and delivery depends on what type of device you're using it with, whether that's a nasal cannula, you're pretty limited to somewhere between 10 and 15 liters of flow, or a face mask, which can deliver higher amounts of oxygen. You don't need a power source, and so oftentimes when people have a new prescription of oxygen, they will have these at their home in addition to the concentrator that gets plugged into the wall, because these are backup oxygen tanks. that do not need power to run. These are the least expensive portable option, which is not all that important to maybe me or you, but it's important to oxygen companies, and so you can kind of start to understand how they operate and why sometimes it's harder to get some of the other portable oxygen options. These deliver, if they're filled by the oxygen supply company, they deliver fairly pure oxygen at 99%, so the purest oxygen that you can have. The length of use, or how long a tank will last, depends on several things. It depends on the size of the tank, and it depends on how fast you're using it. So if you're using 1 liter per minute, it's going to last you longer than if you're using 10 liters per minute because there's about 680 liters in the tank. On average, an e-cylinder will last about 5 hours at 2 liters per minute of continuous flow, and if you have a conserving device, they can last much longer, up to 16 hours. The limitations and issues with these are they're heavy and they're large. They are under a high pressure system, so there's some danger with having them on in a car if there's an accident. They do not allow them onto airplanes, so you can't fly with these, and these have to typically be delivered. There are some systems where you can refill a tank from a home concentrator, and that's going to change the purity of the oxygen somewhat, because if they're filled by the company, they're 99% pure oxygen. If you fill them with a home concentrator, they're 90% plus or minus 5. So moving on to liquid oxygen. Liquid oxygen is contained in a liquid form, and it's not under high pressure, 21 pounds per square inch, but it's very cold. And the nice thing about these is that the ratio of liquid to gas is 1 to 860. So for every 1 liter of liquid oxygen, that's over 800 liters of gas oxygen. These can also have a conserving device added to them to make them last even longer if it's appropriate for you to be on a conserving device. And there's, in general, 2 different sizes. The small size typically only go to 3 liters of continuous flow or 6 liters of pulse flow, and the larger one can go up to 15 liters of flow. The flow rates can go up to 15 liters, as noted before. You don't need a power source for these. They are lighter in weight and have a longer capacity than compressed gas, making them an attractive option for portable use. If you are on portable liquid oxygen, then you can have a large tank that will last several weeks at the home, and you can refill the small portable options from the home source. And you get pure oxygen, or 99% pure oxygen, with the liquid oxygen. Included on this slide. So these are a little bit harder to find. Not all companies carry liquid oxygen, which gets me to my last point here, is it's the most expensive option for a company to supply, and so that's why some companies don't carry this version. You can be burned by the cold oxygen when you're filling it from the home tank to the portable tank, so there's some care and instructions that have to be taken with that. And sometimes the system can kind of freeze up, and while you're trying to fill it, you can't fill it all the way because the cold liquid can freeze up, and you can't transfer it from the home unit into the portable unit. The company has to deliver the large container to your home, and then they have to come and refill it depending on how often or what flow you're using, and sometimes that's weekly, and sometimes it's every other week. And then the third option here is the oxygen concentrators that plug in to the electric socket. These run on electricity. The oxygen is not as pure as with the gas or the liquid oxygen that you get from the oxygen supply company, 90% plus or minus 5%. These usually are set to continuous flow because there's really no reason to have a conserving device on these. And these are kind of this is very standard equipment for the oxygen or the DME durable medical equipment companies to deliver when oxygen is prescribed. You can put a humidifier on this if you have higher flows or if you have a lot of nasal dryness from the oxygen, which is a nice thing to be able to add to these concentrators. The advantages of these is you don't need to have any resupply from the DME provider because all you need is electricity. There's two different versions. There's one that goes to 5 liters per minute of continuous flow, and then there's one that goes to 10 liters per minute of continuous flow. The limitations and disadvantages is that you're not reimbursed by your insurance for electricity, which is usually around $30 to $40 a month. You need some type of backup system in case the power fails. And these are not ideal for patients that need much higher flows of oxygen. So as you can see here, the highest one can go is 10 liters per minute with these. The last one that I'd like to talk about, and sometimes we have the most questions about this, are the portable oxygen concentrators, or POCs as we often call them. They are battery powered. Again, they are similar to the stationary concentrators, where they can create only about 90% of pure oxygen plus or minus 5%. So as low as 85 and as high as 95. Most of these, especially the very small ones that people tend to like, only have pulse flow settings. The minority of units have continuous flow settings, and these units are much bigger and heavier, as I'll show you as some examples in a couple of slides. So the POCs, they're very convenient. They're lightweight and small, and airlines have approved many versions of POCs to be able to take them on an airplane, so they're ideal for traveling. The limitations or disadvantages include that very few units have continuous flow settings, and the ones that do are heavy. They're 12 plus pounds, some of them as high as 20 pounds for the ones that have a continuous flow setting. The pulse flow settings are typically from 1 to 5, and just to stress that these 1 to 5 are not equivalent to liters per minute. So if you're on 2 liters per minute, if you're on pulse flow, a pulse flow setting of 2 may not be enough. And the pulse flow setting that you need varies a lot depending on how frequently you breathe, what your breathing pattern is, whether or not you're triggering the pulse. And these POCs are typically inadequate for people who need more than 3 liters of continuous flow. The battery life, depending on the setting, is somewhere between 3 to 5 hours, and these are also fairly expensive, and sometimes a little bit difficult to come by from the durable medical equipment company. So this is a website that is helpful, I think, to compare different portable oxygen concentrator units. You can see here, these are all some of the more popular ones, and these are ones that have the pulse flow settings, and Inogen now makes one, as well as Care AirSep Focus makes one that's only 2 pounds. These do have fairly low settings. I think they go only as high as 2 on pulse flow. So the smaller the units, typically the lower kind of settings that they will be able to provide for you. But it's a nice website to compare what all the options may be. These are a couple, 3 different ones that go on to continuous flow settings. And the highest I've been able to find are up to 3 liters of continuous flow. And they do way more than, much more than the pulse flow setting options. So this is just a pictograph of how these pulse flow settings work. So there's different versions where when you inhale, which is what triggers the pulse, you can either get an upfront large dose of oxygen. Some of the units will give you a continuous flow during inhalation, and then they stop during exhalation. And other more sophisticated units give you a high pulse in the beginning of inspiration, throughout inspiration, and stop during exhalation. And this is kind of how they conserve the oxygen, is that the devices are not delivering oxygen during exhalation. So many of you may have a pulse oximeter. If you don't, they're a great way to figure out how much oxygen you really need, because when the doctors test you in the clinic, it's a very short window of time, and people's oxygen levels may vary from day to day depending on what's going on. These devices, even ones that you can find on Amazon, actually work pretty well. Although I oftentimes kind of stress to my patients to bring them in to calibrate them and make sure they read within a couple of percentage points of our oximeters in clinic. And the goal for you is to be 90% or above with exercise. When I say titrate to oxygenate, that means if you're not 90%, you can turn the oxygen settings higher to be able to deliver enough oxygen for you to continue to exercise. So in conclusion, oxygen supplementation can improve exercise tolerance, possibly or likely improve longevity and quality of life as well. The outpatient oxygen comes in really 3 different forms: compressed gas, a liquid, and an oxygen concentrator. And the concentrator is either in the stationary or the portable forms. The portable oxygen concentrators are very convenient, but typically are really good for people that only need a smaller dose of oxygen. The oximeters are great, and they allow you to check your own oxygen level and titrate up and down as needed. So with that, I will stop the presentation and see if I can see all of you guys again, and we can take any questions.
All right. Dr. Silhan, I'm asking everybody is to keep their microphone muted. If you have a question, please unmute your mic, ask Dr. Silhan, and we should be in business to do that. I know you can hear me, and I know we have a lot of questions that were texted in. If I can, I'll take a second just to address some of the questions that people have sent notes on, Doctor. One of them, in fact, let me get my chat up here so I can read it. We had a question from Drew about, and Drew, I wonder if you could unmute your mic and ask Dr. Silhan their question directly. See, I'm gonna unmute everybody. Take a gamble here. You should be unmuted, Drew. You want to ask Dr. Silhan your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. The question I had was, are there any dangers of long-term use of oxygen as far as oxygen toxification?
Yeah, that's great. Yes, thank you, Drew, for that question. In regards to long-term downside effects of oxygen use, there's not, from the medical community and research that's been done, there's nothing to say that oxygen at physiologic doses, which means doses needed to get your oxygen level to somewhere between that sweet spot of 88 to 92%. There's no data to say that there is oxygen toxicity. However, I would have to admit that the research in that is fairly limited. There is some evidence that in the ICU, using very high concentrations of oxygen, what we typically think of as 60% to 100% on a ventilator can be harmful and induce something called reactive oxygen species and can create some oxidative damage. However, when they've looked at lower doses in animal studies, there does not appear to be oxygen toxicity or reactive oxygen species at lower doses. So from what we know now, I would say no, there's not any toxicity or concern that we know of. But the research in that is somewhat limited. We do know that low oxygen levels do starve your other organs of oxygen and create problems. The first of which is usually memory and cognitive issues, because the brain is extremely dependent on oxygen to function normally. The other organs can use some form of anaerobic metabolism, meaning they can other organs can utilize energy that is not oxygen dependent, whereas the brain is completely dependent on oxygen. But over time, other organs can be affected as well as they're starved of oxygen. One of the concerning ones is the heart, and that would be the next organ that we get concerned about when there's hypoxia. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Silhan, this is Bill Beck. I have a question, and I've asked this question myself, and I'm going to ask you, because I face the same quandary. We know that some of us that have higher demands, particularly when we're getting into that above 6 liters or more demands for exercise or activity, are having a difficult time for mobility. So liquid oxygen seems to be part of the answer, at least temporarily. We find that very few of the large providers provide liquid oxygen. What are some of the solutions that you've seen, or things we can do ourselves to try to get in that oxygen boat, if you will, and have access to portable liquid oxygen?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Bill. Yeah, it's kind of, just if I may kind of go through so when I started at Hopkins, which was in 2013, I would say over half of the companies that we referred people to had provided liquid oxygen as an option. And by the time I left in 2017 in the Baltimore area, the only company that we could find to deliver supplemental oxygen was Lincare and our own company, which was Hopkins PharmaQuip. None of the other suppliers were carrying it anymore. And one of the problems, I think, is, one of the great problems is reimbursement. So for an oxygen supply company to supply a patient oxygen, they get paid approximately $175 a month by Medicare, or and other insurers typically reimburse about the same rates. But if you take someone that needs oxygen and the company is getting paid $170 a month to supply that oxygen, that incentivizes the company, the DME company, to supply oxygen at the very lowest cost possible. That is, from what I can understand when I've talked with oxygen supply companies, that's the driving factor as to why a lot of them have stopped carrying liquid oxygen, is because it was not cost effective. They were losing more money than they were getting for it. So that's the background on what the issues are with liquid oxygen. And it starts at a level of there being a lot of issues from basically from the federal government and what Medicare, how Medicare reimburses for these things. From a practical standpoint, what is helpful for us on the medical side is if a patient has done a little bit of research and advocating for themselves, and they have some ideas about what they want, and if they have ideas of who may supply that in their area, because some oxygen companies are somewhat local or regional, and if they know who will supply liquid oxygen in their area, it makes it very easy for us to we just write out the order and we fax it to the company, and they deliver it to the patient within that week. So that's a way to advocate for yourself, is if you know you want liquid oxygen and you come to your doctor and say, I want liquid oxygen, doc, and we're like, okay, well, we can try, but we're like, we'll send it to the company that you're using now, but I don't know if they carry it. If they do, then we can prescribe it. Hopefully they'll give it to you. And sometimes that creates some delay when we go about it that way, because then we get a fax back a week later from the company saying they don't carry liquid oxygen and that they don't supply it, and then we have to look into who might supply it. And unfortunately, we are kind of limited. Even our respiratory therapist and our nurse that specializes in oxygen, they don't have the best list of who all supplies it. So that's a practical way to advocate for yourself, is if you can figure out who in your area can supply it to you, and tell your doctor, that makes it a much kind of quicker and easier step to take in getting that prescription.
Doctor, is part of that question. Example, in my case, I kind of had run the traps before I was diagnosed. when I was diagnosed, I knew I needed high demand oxygen because I just don't need it. Like right now, this moment, I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to the gym, if I start running or I start lifting, I know I have high demand.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that, when I went in for my PFTs, like most doctors typically don't have hands-on for the oxygen. Normally what happens, for most of us anyhow, the doctor will turn to a nurse or a PA or somebody else administrative and say, this patient, what they said, Mr. Vick needs oxygen. He needs at least 6 liters direct. Please follow up and send the paperwork on. Well, the person that handled my paperwork, because they had been kind of conditioned by this process, immediately called Inogen and said, I have a patient that needs an Inogen portable concentrator. And I said, no. I said, I don't. I need liquid oxygen. She says, oh, nobody has liquid oxygen. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there's 1,600 patients in the Metroplex. She says, I'm only aware of 4 that have liquid oxygen. So what I did in my case, I said, well, give me the script. Let me call the different suppliers, and I'll find one. And I did. On number 17, 17th phone call, I found a supplier who foolishly said, sure, we can do that. So I'm on liquid oxygen. I get the big tank and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But we have to educate ourselves on that. What has to happen from your standpoint where Medicare or the medical professionals start learning a little bit more about the real demands of pulmonary fibrosis patients compared to their experience with emphysema and COPD?
Yeah, I think, and I think it really has to start at the top. And I know the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, which you're very kind of in tune with, is, I think it really needs to start at the top with legislation and lobbying, because I think, probably 5 years ago, hardly anyone knew about pulmonary fibrosis, but because of the work of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation and groups like yours, PF Lawyers, that more people are becoming aware of what pulmonary fibrosis is. But if you go and ask, probably, the 100 senators we have in Washington right now, my guess would be that a minority of them even know what pulmonary fibrosis is.
Doctor, the word is ZIP. Zip.
Okay. Well, you would probably know much better than I would. With the way that reimbursements are being done, it's abysmal for anyone that needs high flows of oxygen. It has to start from the ground up, but also from the top down.
Okay. I know that both the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation and the American Lung Association are actively lobbying in concert with other organizations, the COPD Foundation, ATS, and many other groups. And that's happening. But that's going to happen maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, next year, in the future. My concerns right now, our concerns right now as patients, is what can we do today? How can we solve some of these problems? Are there any insider tips, hints, ideas, tricks that you know?
And Bill, are you directing that question to me or to any of the group?
Both. I candidly, I think it's unfair to ask you that kind of a question, frankly. But I think our group, we do have people that have solved the puzzle. Some of them haven't had a solved puzzle to solve. I know some of them have gotten oxygen by default, but most of us don't have that luxury and that opportunity. We know we should have it, but getting it is difficult.
Yeah.
I wonder if anyone's come up with another solution besides sitting down and calling and calling and calling.
Bill, this is Jim Ramage. I have an experience in that regard. When I went into the doctor, they did the 6-minute walk. Because I walk a lot every day, the 6-minute walk would not trigger it. But when the doctor said, don't start the clock right yet, wait until his pulse rate comes up and then start the clock, then I went on oxygen really quickly. So it's a matter of somewhat conditioning the doctor to what the situation is outside of the normal in that situation.
That's a really good point. I've actually had patients we have some stairs right by our office. I've had them go up and down stairs because they've told me that the 6-minute walk isn't going to cut it, but the stairs would. So I think that's a great point.
I have another question. On certain days, even on oxygen, we have to turn the oxygen up, even when we're not exercising. I have that happen every once in a while. I noticed some of it due to the weather here, this intense heat. But on other days, it just seems to be kind of a random thing where I have to turn the flow rate up for the day just to get the same result. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, you're definitely not in the minority with that. We'll report that. And I don't know if you have congestion of any kind, but people that are, people that have a lot of congestion sometimes will experience significant swings in their oxygen levels from one day to the next, whether it's due to allergies or fluid overload, and then certainly with the heat comes poor air quality. We have a lot more red and orange days outside in the summer than we do during the winter. The poor air quality days create some problems for people. So that's actually pretty common.
Okay.
I see a couple of questions on the group chat. I think someone asked, Mike asked, is it true that Medicare will only reimburse for supplemental oxygen for 3 years? And yes, that is true, unfortunately. So that's 3 out of 5 years. And so what that means is if you get newly started on oxygen, is that the DME company gets paid by your insurance company for 3 years. And the last 2 years are free. They have to give you oxygen without any reimbursement for that. At 5 years, you can get recertified. You have to get recertified for oxygen, and then the clock starts again, where they get reimbursed for the next 3 years out of 5. The problem that causes is that many companies will not take a patient after they've been with a separate company for a year or more, because then that 3 years is now 2 years if they've already been with another company for a year. And just to let you, there was one other comment from Steve that both Lincare and Apria are not providing liquid oxygen to new patients at this time. I think that's been my experience as well.
Do we have any more questions?
I think we're all a little bit stunned by this. Well, I am. I'm new to oxygen. So our solutions are either we've got to stay on the phone for hours trying to find a company that will provide liquid oxygen, or we have to move Washington. There has got to be something in between. Can we not communicate with heads of oxygen, or are they too many little individual companies to make that possible? Or I'm trying to think of anything in between.
Eileen, I couldn't hear that part of the question. Your part of the question very well. You said, "Is there a way to?" Is there a way to do something? And I missed that part.
Is there a way to do something in between trying to move Washington or calling for days to try to find liquid oxygen? And I guess I'm thinking about communicating with heads of oxygen companies.
Eileen, just on your situation, how much oxygen are you on?
Oh, I'm on 2 liters for exercise, but I know it's going to get, increased.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if this answers your question at all. So at low flow rates, the portable oxygen concentrators are very useful, I think. For some people love them. But you're right. I mean, as the disease progresses, and I'm not sure what your diagnosis is, but if and when it does progress, then yeah, your requirements would go up.
I guess no one is taking into consideration, as Bill said, the higher requirements for oxygen for an IPF patient.
Right.
We've all lobbied in some way for this to change, and I think there are some groups working on it, but it's frustrating not to see a solution out there.
Yeah, I hear you, Eileen. I agree.
If I can comment, Eileen addressed that, and yes, there are groups working on that problem. Part of the problem is the CMS, which establishes some of the procedures for Medicare, followed by the insurance industry. They have a board that makes these decisions, and their board doesn't get it. The specifications they have written for oxygen supplementation are based on a study for emphysema, where the max is about 4 liters of oxygen. So in their vision, in their world, patients collectively, they don't segment them or separate them, they've written the specs based on a COPD model, not on a model that helps us as pulmonary fibrosis patients, because we have different needs. We have much higher needs, much more demand. And but what I see happening, in part because of the PFF, and in part because of the American Lung Association, and I think in part because of the PF Warriors, and there's another catalyst in the equation, which is Three Lakes Partners, which are really doing some significant investments in this area. And in one of their hot buttons, I know, is oxygen. And you're going to see some things happening in the short term that are positive. Whether it happens at the government level or not, I question. But I can tell you, you'll see some solutions kind of on the horizon.
Well, I will be visiting on the 18th with my local legislator and additional legislators in the month of August as a part of.
I am meeting with Senator Cruz on the same day here in Dallas, Texas, so I understand.
Good. I'm meeting with Senator Palmer.
Bingo.
I think we've all got to kind of move like this, using ourselves as advocates to try to make change.
Yes.
I mean, we've got a lot going on at the top, but we've got to do it from the bottom as well, those of us who can.
Well, we've got 40 people here this morning that can move it, and we collectively can do that. It's like putting one foot in front of the next and doing it again and again. It's the same here. We have to raise our voices with one song, one tune, one note, and that note is advocacy and care. And I don't mean to evangelize. I'm sorry. I apologize. I shouldn't do that.
I know. I'm sorry.
I feel very strong about that. Do we have any more questions for Dr. Silhan, who, by the way, I think did an absolutely incredible presentation. I knew going in she was going to be devastating, and devastating she is. I think she has said a great job. I've heard her before. I took notes again. I learned new things again, and I thought I was getting towards the top of the curve. I'm not even approaching it. And I want to thank her so much for what you've done and what you do for us every day. I know with patients that you work with at Baylor Scott White here in Dallas, universally I get nothing but accolades for you. You do a great job with them. And if there are no more questions, we're going to say collectively thank you. I would like to make one request of the people on this call, if you would. If you have a second, please go to the Facebook PF Warrior page and post a note about this experience. Give an acknowledgement to Dr. Silhan for giving us her Saturday morning, which is a precious time to her, and in helping us understand this whole puzzle of oxygen. And I think she's done more today to help us collectively than I can ever imagine, or it's beyond my expectation. And I want to thank her again. But please take a moment and go to our webpage for PF Warrior. Say thank you. Let other people know how valuable this was to you. And I'm going to ask for Dr. Silhan, if she can send me a copy or a slide deck. I'll take that slide deck and put it in a video format and put it online along with this video. That'll go up in about a week.
Great, Bill. And yeah, when we were having the technical difficulties, I forwarded it to you just in case.
Bill, can I ask a quick question?
Sorry.
A question, please?
About oximeter cannulas. What are your thoughts about the usage of oximizers with our portable devices?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, the oximizers are, if you guys haven't seen them, they look like a nasal cannula. The cannula tends to be a little bit bigger, but they have a small pendant, usually that sits at the level of the middle of the chest, where the flow of oxygen goes into the pendant first, and then when you inhale, you're inhaling oxygen from this little pendant or a little container that has the concentrated oxygen. And in my opinion, those are great if you need 8 liters or more. If you don't need high flows, you probably don't need an oxymizer. They're not harmful, but you do tend to go through the oxygen quicker. So the portable oxygen will last shorter. And Drew just told me that they are very uncomfortable. So I think that Drew may be, I'm looking at the Zoom group chat, what he says they're very uncomfortable. And I think that the reason for that is that the cannula that sits on the face and goes into the nose is larger. Like the nasal prongs are larger because they're trying to deliver, you can get more flow through a larger tube, obviously. So
I've actually used the oximeter when I'm traveling on an airplane because I've needed a little bit more oxygen and to conserve the battery on my POC. It was very helpful to me. I actually got 2 more hours, and the plug on the airplane was not working, so I was going to run really close on battery life. So I found that was very helpful for me, and I require continuous flow oxygen, and when I'm walking, I need about 4 liters, and my POC only goes to 3, so I have found that it's been very beneficial to me. I don't like them. They are uncomfortable, but it has been such a godsend to my dependent. So I just, another question I had real quickly was, it's not harmful, correct?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
The usage of the oximeter is not harmful.
It is not harmful. No, definitely not.
Okay, so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a quick question, I think. This is Nancy Lee. What do you recommend for patients short of hospitalization when their needs exceed the 10 liters that the home concentrator provides?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So I've actually learned probably a lot from my patients in this regard because there's really no help from the suppliers in this, and there's really, even respiratory therapists struggle with what to do in these situations. I've learned a lot from my patients, but what I typically do is give them a mask. I'll give them a face mask, and I'll also try to grab, and I have to do this from the ICU because they don't typically carry them in clinic, but I will try to grab a non-rebreather mask, which is it looks like a face mask of oxygen for the mouth, but it has a bag underneath the mask that actually for like pure oxygen. So I'll try to get a mask, and then what my patients have taught me, and some of my patients who have, I think a couple of engineers have done some splicing of ways to splice together extra oxygen supplies. So some people will use the concentrator that plugs into the wall, and then they will splice in another tube into basically where 2 tubes come together, and then go to the nasal cannula where they'll turn on the tank as well. I actually have not seen a good way of how to do that effectively without damaging some of the tubing. But what I have seen done, which I think is useful for some people, is to have the concentrator set on 10, and then for any activity, which is usually when the oxygen levels will plummet, turn the tank on and put a mask on to do the activity, such as, you know, the bathroom or getting up to cook or whatever someone might be doing, so that you're actually on 2 different devices at one time when you need higher flow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think Sue Krazan has a question, Doctor. Sue, you have to unmute your microphone.
Yes, I believe there's something called a Y connector that you can connect the tubes together.
I think you're correct, although I have not ordered one before, but I know that a couple of my patients have figured out a way to splice in. That's probably what they've used.
Yes, that there is something that's available that's called that. And then I have another question. I'm typically a mouth breather, so sometimes I wonder if I'm not getting enough oxygen because my nose is congested with allergies. Would you suggest like a face mask for that?
You know, face mask, you could use one at night, but there are some problems with the face mask. Obviously, very logical ones where eating and drinking and that sort of thing. But I don't love people to sleep with them as the primary source of oxygen, because it can create some carbon dioxide retention, because it's you are breathing back in some of the carbon dioxide that you're exhaling. So for that reason, I don't love people. What I would suggest would be nasal ways to open up the nasal passages, such as like neti pot irrigations, or sometimes some inhaled or nasal steroids could be helpful. I'm going to work with you on that, but the mask is not my favorite option for sleeping.
Okay, thank you.
Right. All right, we're going to say goodbye to Dr. Silhan and close down, and thank you all so much for participating. This has been, I think, it's been a great experience, a great meeting. And next time around, I'm going to counsel with my friend Vic Morgan and get some insights on how he does, because he's a master of this Zoom thing. And I'm going to get him a little more involved in our next presentation. But I want to thank you all for attending. It's just been, I think, a great experience, great information. And again, Dr. Silhan, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. And I apologize for the initial issues, but I'm glad it all worked out well.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well.